The following podcast may contain strong language and situations that may be disturbing and or triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Sean,
I'm Aaron.
and welcome to Adventures in Mental Health.
Let's start with highs and lows. What's your high for today?
My high today is I saw something that's kind of funny. I'm probably going to turn it into an Instagram post or something. But I saw an actual chicken in like a regular bucket, like a paint bucket. And I'm like, I really need to go get like a KFC bucket and grab that chicken and put it in the KFC bucket, take a photo and add the post. We went to KFC. I think our order got a little underdone. Um, my low is that oh, I'm just kind of having a hard time getting motivated today. I'm just kind of dragging. Um, thing I'm looking forward to. I kind of just really want to watch a lot of stand-up comedy tonight. That's kind of my plan. Just gonna watch a ton of stand-up comedy.
Oh, that's fair. I've actually had a really good day. One, I love this weather. The fall has definitely arrived, and this is my time of year. Um, I got breakfast with my son. It was a beautiful sunrise, so those were all highs for me today. Oh, I haven't had a low today. It's been a pretty good day. What I'm looking forward to is relaxing later tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about epigenetics and how that affects our how it affects us physically and psychologically. All of the information that I'm going to be using comes from the APA website or Centers for Disease Control.
And I should note this is largely going to be an Erin episode because this is really kind of one of her fields of study. She is very much interested in how our environments affect our bodies and minds.
We're going to start by talking about what epigenetics is, what it means for us in terms of building resilience, and then how it impacts our mental health. Um, so we'll just begin there. All of the information I'm getting is going to be taken directly from CDC website, so Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, National Institute of Health, and American Psychological Association. So we're going to start with defining it. So basically, epigenetics is a study of how behaviors and environment cause changes that affect the way that your genes work. Um, so it changes the way that your genes are expressed. And a good example of this is, in twin studies, each no matter even though they're genetically identical, sorry, and grow up in the same household, each twin has different experiences, which is why as they get older, they start to behave different and they look more different. So, epigenetics, so even though there's changes in the way that your genes are expressed, it doesn't change the sequencing of your genes. So your actual DNA stays the same. It's just your environment changes what's expressed and what's not. So this has some implication for us mental health wise. It has implications for our psychological resilience, and that's pretty much what we're going to be talking about. One of the things, we cannot separate the instances of mental health disorders like bipolar disorder and schizophrenia from genes. But also, we know that trauma is a huge influence on whether or not you develop those disorders. So those disorders are there in our genes before trauma occurs, and then trauma causes those disorders to be expressed. Do you have
So, okay, this might be a loose one, but I watched a movie recently, an M. Night Shyamalan movie called Old, and I'll do my best to explain this without ruining the movie if you want to see it, because it's pretty good actually. There's a situation where there's a character they establish early in the movie has latent mental health issues, and what ends up happening is the characters are trapped on a beach and there's no escape, like, and they're all going to die unless they figure out a way to get out. And during this stressful situation, his tendencies come out. And I don't know if that's what M. Night Shyamalan was trying to say with the movie, or if he was trying to say something else. I can't speak for him artistically, but it's a good visual display, at least even accidentally. It's a good display of a stressful situation causing latent mental health tendencies to flip on like a light switch. And the thing is, people may wonder, why is this? Why does this occur? This can occur, think of it in an evolutionary manner. Think of it as in back in when we were running away from saber-toothed tigers and living in caves, a high stress situation actually meant there was something probably trying to kill you. And genetics like these can cause a person to, let's be honest, be effective in a high stress situation. In a calm situation, are these tendencies and behaviors helpful or productive? Not necessarily. However, in a high stress situation, they can be highly advantageous. And so, kind of like the movie Deadpool, it activates them as a response. And I guess you could say you have a new normal. Would that be a good way to put it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. And at the end, I'll talk about a couple of books that I've, read, and I follow the authors on YouTube, who really do a good job of explaining it. But while the changes in the genes, it doesn't change your DNA. It does change what's expressed, and that can be, there's a theory that is still being studied. It can be passed down from generation to generation, which is where you get generational trauma. And this occurs in groups that have experienced war, famine, just long-term community violence. We have cities in the U.S. that for a long period of time were not safe places to be. New York is one. New York City is a very stressful. It's always been known to have high crime rates. And so people who live there, their genetics change, and these changes can be passed on. You have the environmental factors, you have the habits that develop from living in such a high stress situation, and then you have the changes that occur to your gene expression, and those are all passed on generation. Um, and you saw this a lot when I was working in group homes. I see it. I continue to see it now with adults, although it's not as pronounced. Where you see, multiple generations where families were not able to keep their children. You have grandparents who had their children removed from the home because of abuse or neglect, and then you have the parents who had their children removed from the home because of abuse or neglect. And so, getting a good understanding of epigenetics and how your environment affects your genes and your behavior can really help reduce and break some of those cycles. So lots of studies have been done on epigenetics and its role in psychological resilience. There's currently a longitudinal study going on in Afghanistan. This was in science.org, where it looks at kids in orphanages and how their behaviors and their genetics have been altered somewhat from um, other kids who, from a similar population, probably looking at comparing to immigrants to other countries, and they want to see if these genetic changes get passed on from generation to generation. Um, and what it is looking at. So we know that children of parents who suffered some significant trauma are less able to bounce back from trauma themselves. So traumatic events affect them more severely than somebody whose parents didn't experience trauma. And what they're trying to tease out is this behavioral? Are parents who experience trauma unwittingly passing symptoms of PTSD onto their children? And um, and is that the cause of these behavior changes? So if you have an anxious parent or a hypervigilant parent, are they teaching their children to be hypervigilant? So is it all environmental, or is there a genetic component to that as well?
There's something I actually want to add to this. A comedian I was just watching the other night, was it last? No, it was the other night. A comedian by the name of Jim Gaffigan. Um, he has a whole comedy bit on last names, and he explains that his actual last name in Scottish Gaelic means highly anxious. And the whole bit is the how do you get the last name highly anxious? And so he has a whole bit. It's hilarious. But that's the point, is literally his name implies that there are genetic traits that have been passed on due to traumatic events and or environmental exposure.
Yeah. And so that has real implications on psychological resilience, which we'll talk about later. Uh, but I mean, people who have come from families where there's been a lot of trauma are less psychologically resilient. And what does it mean when you have this happen generation over generation over generation? In this country, a lot of the African American population who've been here for multiple generations, they have experienced systematic racism. There's redlining was a thing. Redlining was people weren't allowed to buy homes in certain neighborhoods, and the homes that they did purchase were neighborhoods that were less safe. So they experienced much more community violence. There was then the civil rights movement and all of the trauma associated with that. Um, and then there was slavery, which was the removal of personhood. So the people who survived these events were obviously resilient, but the effects didn't end with them. It was passed on from generation to generation, because you're having multiple generations experience trauma over and over and over again. Uh, so we see, similarities in behavior and whatnot coming from as a direct result of that trauma. Um,
And there are basically events for any people throughout history that you can easily describe this as. Name any people, and I can tell you some horrible, horrible things that have happened to you at some point in human history. So this isn't like one group or another group has a specific epigenetic issue. It's that no, we all have these issues somewhere in our lineage, somewhere along there. I mean, for instance, you know that whole thing how 1/4 of everyone of European descent is related to Genghis Khan, like that whole thing. Like it seems like that was probably a pretty traumatic period for the European people, I'd imagine. I-
yeah, yeah, incredibly traumatic, and a lot of so the people who survived that event passed some of that trauma on to their children. I
I,
I
I,
personally believe, this is not based in science, this is my personal belief, that the trauma that we've experienced as a in humanity over millennia is contributes to how violent we are today. The people who survived were the ones who could kill the saber-toothed tiger the best.
Once again, a quarter of us are related to Genghis Khan.
Right. A quarter of us are related to Genghis Khan, who was very violent. Um, the people who are alive today are people who survived war and famine.
The
So
Black Plague.
yeah, and so that contributes to our behaviors today. Um, So, unlike true genetic changes, where your DNA is changed, and some of the changes that we see in humanity are because from natural selection. The people who survived are the people who are the strongest, who could be the most violent, who had no issues with killing things and breaking, killing and breaking things.
Because it leads to being able to protect your tribe, being able to provide for your tribe. It leads to their survival.
Right.
So yes, these are the traits that end up getting passed on.
So you have some of those genetic traits, but the epigenetic aspect of it is reversible because it doesn't actually change the DNA sequence, just what genes are
Currently being
expressed.
expressed, yeah.
Um, so one of the things, it's like, how long does it take to reverse epigenetic changes? And this is from CDC. It can 12 months of participation in a clinical trial. So they had showed in this particular trial, and it doesn't really give me a lot of information on what this trial was, but within 12 months of whatever they were doing, some of those changes were reversible, which is actually really good news for us, who are trying to manage our trauma response. And if you're getting ready to have kids, um, will prevent you from passing some of these expressions onto to your children.
So this research actually may lead to essentially everyone having healthier families just by default,
I mean,
possibly, maybe.
hopefully. And some of these changes, some of like pollutants and whatnot, cause us to age faster. And so removing the pollutants will, slow aging. We know that. So what does removing trauma do? You know, or actually treating trauma? How does that affect the epigenetic changes that occur? And that is all research that is currently being done. I'm super excited about it. Um, and there's a couple of books that I highly recommend, and one psychologist or psychiatrist, I'm not really sure exactly, but Gabor Mate, he runs I think it's a, like, he's a doc, he provides medical care for addicts in the Toronto area where they do needle exchange and drug treatment and that kind of stuff. And he wrote a book called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts. Excellent book. It discusses a lot about the effects of trauma on the body and the effects of trauma on your physical health. The other book, can't remember the author. Actually, let me look that up right now. The Body Keeps Score: Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma, written by Bessel von der Kolk. Really good book.
I'm looking at it. Let me see if I can pronounce that. Bessel
Def-
van der Kolk?
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely butchered his name.
Yeah, we'll post the actual written name.
But really good book, and it kind of gives you a roadmap on how to fix some of the things that are going on with you physically as a result of trauma. Because once again, trauma affects every aspect of your life, and once you fix trauma, it fixes a lot of other things or makes a lot of other things much easier to treat, which is why we're going to be talking about trauma a lot.
That's fair
Um,
enough. So I think this is actually going to be a shorter episode because that's really all we know about this particular topic. There are a number of experts on the subject matter out there, and we will be posting resources for you guys to look them up and look at their research and look at what they have to say because they know more about the topic than we do.
yeah.
We're trying to cover as much ground as we can, and we know some stuff and we're sharing it with the world. But what we're really trying to do is point you in the direction of the people who are the experts or specialists in these specific fields, so that if you have an interest in a particular topic, you can really deep dive with the people who have spent their life on this one subject. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I think this is an important subject to research on your own, to gain some more understanding, which is the purpose of introducing it. And that's
Yeah.
that's really all I got.
Yeah. I'm gonna say goodnight, guys. Until the next adventure.
Good night.